Hi, this is Jonathan Weinberg, and this is Drawing with Fountain Pens. Today I'm going to talk about my acquisition of probably my most expensive Grail pen. I say most expensive, but in reality, I didn't pay anything like what it is supposed to cost. One of the terrible habits that I have is when I can't sleep in the middle of the night, I look on my iPad on eBay and I look around for any bargains, and in the middle of the night this pen appeared, this Urushi pilot pen. Now if you look at websites in the United States, you will see that this pen lists for $1,500. I paid something like a third of that. I don't recommend this, but it seemed to be a great deal. Usually I say never buy a pen on eBay that you can't return, but this was from somebody who had 100% rating. They were somebody who had auctioned off many fountain pens before, and when I assume when you have a deal like that, this is somebody who wants to get their money very quickly, and so they're not really thinking about, well, what is it really worth, and also maybe they want to get it into the hands of somebody who can really appreciate it. Anyway, I took a chance, and I was rewarded by getting this incredibly beautiful pen. It really is remarkable because of its extraordinary nib. In the pilot line of pens, not their more expensive line, Namiki, but anyway, in the pilot line of pens, this is the most expensive pen, and it also has the largest nib. As always, please subscribe. That's the way to support the channel. Now, if you follow my channel, you might be thinking that you're having a little bit of a deja vu, because you'll think, oh, he already reviewed and talked about this pen. But what I talked about before was the Pilot Custom 845 Urushi pen, which looks just like this one, but as you can see, it is much smaller. In fact, this has got to be one of the largest pens, if not the largest pen in my collection. And that's something to keep in mind if you really plan to use this pen all the time, but it really is quite enormous. And I'll go into detail comparing the two. But they both have the same color. They're both done with the Urushi process, which comes from a tree that only grows in Japan, and it's a very elaborate, slow hand process of enameling the ebonite material that goes into the barrel and creating this beautiful luster, very hard surface on these two pens. And so it's very, very desirable. It feels very beautiful in the hand. But at the same time, for pens that are so expensive, I think one of the things that's elegant about them is that these are rather understated pens. They're not going out of their way to, impress you with how fancy they are and expensive. And I actually like that. The thing is, of course, when you have a pen that is so expensive, are you really going to use it every day? I will, of course, use these pens. I don't believe in buying pens that you can't use, but I have to say I would really hesitate taking the larger Urushi pen and traveling with it or using it to sketch for every day. And actually, I even sort of worry about doing that with the 845, which can list for $900 in the United States, but you can see it, buy it for considerably less. And that's true, too, of the more expensive pen that lists for $1,500. Even in the United States, you can see it for around $1,250, and then it goes down below $900 if you get it from a Japanese dealer. Right now, the yen in comparison to the dollar is very low, so pens from Japan are real bargains given the exchange rate. So here, in fact, is the box that it came with, which is the box that it should come with, and it's quite beautiful. What's interesting is that this box, I really like it, but it's not actually as fancy as the wooden box that comes with the Custom 845. So it comes here, it's in this it has its outer sleeve, and then you open it up and it's all black, and then you open it up like this. It's kind of rolled in here, and you see that it comes in its own little, this really is like a coffin. It says Pilot. It comes with a lot of documentation. It comes with a cartridge. This is a cartridge. This is a converter pen, and so the pen also comes with a Pilot converter in it. And so all this documentation is in the bottom, and you can see this is all what should come with a pen like this. And it had a lot of pictures that came with it, so I could kind of check. So everything about it looks right. And so it was a great bargain, but it is very possible that you could have a really bad experience on eBay. And it's always, I suppose, best to buy a pen from an authorized dealer. This was sold as a used pen, so I don't have any right to the warranty that would come with it. And even if it was new, and it seems absolutely mint to me, the warranty would not be in effect. Now, if I was buying a car or an elaborate something electric or something easily breakable, I would be much more worried about the warranty. But a fountain pen, to be honest, is not so incredibly complicated. And I think, and I know a lot about pens, and I also know people who fix pens. So that's something to factor into all this. But it always is buyer beware. So what is so special about this pen? Well, I've mentioned already that it is really a really big pen, as Ed Sullivan would say. It's a really, really big pen. And the size here, close, is 6 inches. When you opened it up, it is 5.5 inches. What makes it very large, it's not just how long it is, but how wide the pen is. So it just seems like a very huge pen. If you compare the size to the 845, you'll see that the 845, which is a large pen, I mean, it's not a small pen, is almost 5 3/4 inches, right? And so you see that it kind of dwarfs that pen. Weight-wise, it's 45 grams, a little bit more than 45 grams, which is pretty heavy, but not as heavy as you think when you're holding it. I think that's because of the ebonite, the Urushi material is relatively lightweight and strong, but lightweight. It's hard to do this. It's kind of rolling here. It's 27 grams without the top. And you don't really post this pen. And that's a reasonable weight that you can, write with for a long time. The for comparison stakes, the Custom 845 is 29 grams with the top, and without the top, 17.8 grams. So considerably lighter, as you would think. It's an interesting relationship. It's not unlike the relationship of the Pelikan M800 to the M1000. But you can see that the M1000 is not nearly as hefty or as big, has this, has the Urushi Pilot pen. I mean, this is considerably bigger. I don't have one, but now we're really talking on the size of, let's say, the Sailor King of pens. That would be a comparable pen in terms of just the hugeness of this pen. And the question is, is this a kind of pen that you really would use every day, or is it really for special occasions when you have to sign something or something that really write a very, very important letter? Or some people have very, very large hands. So when you see a pen this big, you go, wow, this makes the M1000 Pelikan's huge pen look almost small by comparison. If we compare it to the Pilot Metropolitan, again, you can see how big this pen is. So here's the Pilot Metropolitan. Here's the Pelikan M800. Excuse me, M1000. So you can get a sense of these different sizes in the real world. Now you'll notice one thing that I haven't done so far is I haven't posted the pen. So here's the pen unposted. You could post this pen. First of all, it would become ridiculously big, posted. It will post. But Pilot itself doesn't recommend that you post it because this wonderful finish that this pen is all about really is something that you want to protect. Now, the finish is extremely durable and hard, with the exception that it can fade. The color can fade in light. So it's not a pen that you want to keep out in the sunlight or even in regular light all the time. I would, if you're storing this pen, I would store it in a pen sleeve or in covered place so that it doesn't see the light, because you don't want it to fade and you don't want to lose this beautiful lustrous color. But the actual surface of the pen is very, very hard, like glass. So that's nice. It's very resistant to scratching and beautiful. So I have to say that the star of the show for me is not so much the Urushi finish, which is really wonderful, beautiful, but the nib. It's all about it's almost always for me about the nib. Now, of course, on this pen, you get Pilot's largest nib, the number 30 nib. This is a broad, and it is really large. It's a little bit larger even than the Pelikan's M1000 nib. It's larger than the Mont Blanc nib on the 149. So it's a huge nib. But I'm not a believer just because the nib is big that it's going to necessarily write well. You can see here that it, of course, is bigger than the nib on the Pilot 845. This nib on the 845 writes very smoothly, but it doesn't particularly have any flex. And the same thing is true for the most part for the Pelikan. A little bit of flex on the Pelikan M1000 nib. But this nib, the nib on the Pilot, actually does flex, and I'll show that in the writing sample, and it has a marvelous bouncy quality to it. It really is, and it's smooth and wet, and it really now competes with the M800 pen, my Pelikan M800 pen, for being the nib that I like the best to draw and write with. So that's really special about the pen. It's not just because the pen is beautiful to look at and that it has this wonderful enamel surface in color, but the nib is really superb. And so you're getting something that really is, for me, sort of the pinnacle of what a pen should be. It's not fancy looking, particularly. There are pens that you can get for much less money that look very similar to this. After all, it really is a pen that goes back in its style all the way to the Parker Duofold from the 1920s. That's really what they are imitating here in a pen that looks like this. There's no attempt to make a pen look distinctive or different from the history of the fountain pen, but it's the way the pen writes that is so marvelous. In terms of getting ink into the pen, it's similar to the Custom 845 in that it uses the converter, the 70 converter, which when it works well. I'm somewhat ambivalent about it. Here it is, actually filled with ink in my Custom 845, and it holds quite a lot of ink. The trick with this converter, and they tell you this, is that usually with a converter, you fill it, you put it in the ink and you fill it once, but you push on this little button, and the trick is you should push on the button at least 6 times as you're filling it with ink, and that really does work. I'm not sure what the science of that is, but it really does work. And I have to say the pilot converters, because of their whole mechanism, they're not just an empty space here, they have this little rod, really do provide ink well to the pen. I've also, in writing with this pen, even though it writes so wet and has flex to it, I have not noticed any of the skipping issues that people sometimes encounter with the Pilot Custom 823 or the 743 and require you to get an ebonite feed. It seems to write smoothly and beautifully. So it's just terrific from that. It's no problem. The big deal with it, I would say, if you're thinking about a pen that you want to write with, is the size. And I think that a lot of people, if they're honest, would say, well, I don't really want a pen that's that big. I want all the same qualities of the pen. I want a smooth pen. I'm not interested necessarily in flex, but I want a pen that writes smoothly and beautifully and looks much the same. Well, then I think the Custom 845 is the perfect pen for you, because it's a much more sensible size. And actually, I think it is sort of Pilot's equivalent of the Pelikan M800 in terms of sort of, elegance and beauty and writing smoothly. And it's just a good journaling pen. If you want an experience that really is sort of extraordinary, it's sort of like a sports car experience in terms of the nib, and I think also for drawing, and it's really, if you want something really special, I think this pen is for you, but it still might bother you that it is so big. If I was working with Pilot and trying to come up with a different pen, I might come up with a pen that used the same nib but wasn't so huge, that was more the size of the 845, maybe just a touch bigger, right? Or maybe the size of the M1000, actually Pelikan's M1000, rather than making such a huge pen, which after all looks, I think almost it seems a bit too, because of its size, looks kind of showy from just size standpoint. But I don't get to make those decisions. So, as always, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a writing sample. I also will write with the 845, do a bit of comparison there. And then I have just recently did one of those bonsai classes where you learn to make a bonsai. I don't know if making a bonsai is right. Planting a bonsai, you do it as an evening. It was a lovely gift, and so I couldn't think of a more appropriate thing to draw than my tiny little pathetic little jade plant bonsai that I recently was able to shape and learn about doing a few days ago. So how does it write? So this is the Pilot Urushi. Now, it occurs to me that one reason that I think also this was a bargain is, as you'll notice, it's a broad nib. And I think a lot of people who would want this pen would not want it in a broad. They would want it in a fine, so that, because it does have flex, so it can go from a fine to a broad, perhaps, in it when you flex it. But I really like broad nibs. And I would never do that with this nib because it's so beautiful, but I mean, it actually has potential as a broad to be custom grind to put, for example, into a stub or an italic, and that is something that somebody might want to do with a pen like this. Anyway, this is Rhodia paper. And I think appropriately, this is Takisumi ink, which is my favorite black ink. And it writes very, very wet and unbelievably smoothly. It's hard to describe just how smooth this pen is. And you can see that it actually has quite a lot of flex. And actually, it writes very well upside down. So you can get a pretty fine line if you write with it upside down. So for as a drawing pen, it really is terrific. And it has this lovely, it's hard to describe it, but lovely bounce to it. It is it is so wet that I'm not going to wipe it because I don't want to get ink on my fingers. But it is very wet, very smooth. And here we go. Now, it's a real broad. To me, this is a Western broad, not a Japanese broad, I suppose. And actually, I've noticed that Japanese mediums below tend to be finer, but sometimes when you jump to the broad, they become like Western broads. So that may be the case. It may also be the case. Remember, I got this pen used, so maybe that's one thing that, you know, the user had it ground in a particular way. This tiny, ever so tiny feedback to it, but it's just lovely. Here is the Pilot Custom 845. But this is a medium, so it's a little bit like apples to oranges. This is Waterman Mysterious Blue. And this has a little bit of a bounce. I mean, these are both gold nibs. The Custom 845 has a 14 karat nib, and it is the Pilot Japanese size 15. And it writes perfectly smoothly with a little bit more feedback, but it's not, you know, extraordinary, and it doesn't have much flex at all. I mean, it really doesn't, well, a little bit, but not much at all. It's a nice writer, but not extraordinary by any means. I mean, I much prefer a Pilot Falcon nib to this nib, or one of, you know, the nib that's on the 743, the Falcon nib on the 743 to this particular nib. So it really can't compete, as you would expect, with the, you know, expense of the 18K nib that's on the on its bigger brother.